Luke 10:25 through 37. Who is my neighbor? Hey everybody, it's Julie here. Thanks for joining me in this Bible journaling process. I'm using some Illustrated Faith and Bella Boulevard tabbies and washi strips. This is a stamp set from the Connecting Devotional kit and a couple of washi tapes that I'm going to be using. I'm also going to be using a question mark stamp from this set. I'll have everything linked. I'm using some Distress ink and the Memento Inkpad. I am doing this, it's from a sermon that I heard today. I'm going to be doing some smush inking, and this is just a fun process. I took a cellophane bag, just a packaging, and I took the Distress ink and stamped it onto the clear cellophane, and then I just dropped some water on it, and the water activates the ink, and you'll see that I just flip it over and smush it within the cellophane, and then I flip it over onto the Bible page. I'm just working on the background here, and I really like this just random approach. So I take that cellophane, wipe it off, and just carefully dry it off a little bit. I take a heat gun and just pop that on it, heat the wetness off of it, dry that up just a little bit. Now I'm going to take the yellow, which is Fossilized Amber. The blue was Mermaid, Lagoon. I'm doing the same thing onto the cellophane, just stamping directly onto the cellophane, then drop some water onto it. This time, though, I'm not going to smush it first before I put it onto the Bible, the page. I just flip it directly. That gives me more of a spotted look, whereas before, when I smashed it and smushed it first, it put it together and made it more puddled. This time just makes it a little more splotchy. I had a couple of spots that did not get wet with the drops, so I'm going back over them with just one of the travel paint brushes to wet that up a little bit. I'm going to dry it. And I'm using that. You want to gently just tug at the page to make sure that it flattens it out some. Nice thing about the back side is that you can use that for another page. This is a Stampin' Up! Heat gun that I've had for years, but I know there's some other types like the Ranger heat gun. I'm using an old credit card, well actually this is an old gift card, and some white acrylic paint. I'm just going over this to lighten it up a little bit. It was just a little too bright for me. I didn't want it quite that bright. So going over it, just gently scraping it with the acrylic paint directly on the card, just gently scraping it. And see, I don't want to cover up the paint, I just want to mute it. Now what I'm going to do is use a baby wipe, and I'm going to put the paint directly onto the baby wipe. That was off the screen, off the camera. But you can see here, it just softens the effect a little bit. So it just blends it in a little bit. You can do this for any kind of background. Just put the ink directly on the baby wipe and gently rub that on. I'm going to hit it with the heat gun again. This acrylic paint does dry pretty quickly, but because I'm going to be stamping on it, I want to make sure it's good and dry, otherwise it could be sticky. So again, I flatten it. You do need to move your heat gun around a lot so that it doesn't burn the paper. The stamp set I'm using is an old Hostess set from Stampin' Up! That I got several years ago, and I haven't used it yet. Now, most of the older Stampin' Up! Sets were wood-mounted wood blocks, and so what I actually did was took them off of the wood blocks and used some glue and made them so that I can mount them directly onto acrylic blocks like this, and it makes storage easier. So I'm just making an edge. I don't want to have any focal points right now from these stamps. I used the blue, the Mermaid Lagoon, for the heart image. Now for the circle image, I'm using the yellow, what is it, Fossilized Amber. And again, I'm just staying on the edge, half of an image because I don't want a full image. It just looks like it's kind of coming off the page. And I like the way this is looking. So now I'm going to bring in some black, and I'm using the flower image. This is a Memento ink. It is a fade resistant dye ink. It's a permanent ink. So just kind of intermingle that within the blue and the yellow. I come back later because I realize that there's a spot that I want to add one more black flower to. But I really like how this turned out. It's just a nice effect on the side. I just clean it with a baby wipe. Now if I'm doing a lot of stamping, I make sure that I use a stamp cleaner. But baby wipes are awesome for this, just quick cleanup. So now I'm using the Craving Connection Devotional kit, the stamp set that came in it. And the images that I'm using are going to say, go beyond home, because this text talks about who is my neighbor. So the sermon was all about just reaching out beyond what we're normally doing, what we're usually doing, and just go beyond our home, go beyond our workplace, and minister to people, be alert. You saw me tapping on my hand the stamp first before I inked it up. Sometimes I've found that works best, maybe just getting a little bit of the oil onto the stamp so that it sticks to, or the ink sticks to it. But I've also found that if you don't get a clear image, maybe just sanding it down gently with a emery board or something like that. I didn't like the way the blue turned out, so I went back over it with the black, and I like that better, but I'm actually just going to later on go back over that with the pen. So now I'm taking the home stamp, go beyond home, and again, this is what God wants us to do, to just be willing to reach out, go beyond our comfort zone, to be aware and alert of the opportunities that He provides, to be a neighbor, not just in our neighborhood, but so many times we're not neighbors to our neighbors, but to people we come in contact with. So I want to trace this that I doodled earlier during the sermon, but I realized that with the acrylic paint that I had put on the page, I couldn't use a light box. You can often use an iPad or your iPhone, the light for that, to be a light box, so you can just trace an image, but because of the paint, I wouldn't be able to see through it. And with this paint on here, a pencil wouldn't really be able to be seen either, so I'm just freehanding it with my 2.5 Illustrated Faith pen. So I just do a few loops and embellishments, and I think it turns out nice. I liked how the doodling during church worked out better, but it's still a pretty effect. So I go back over it with a brush pen. This is a Pitt calligraphy brush pen, and I just darken it in. I'm going to go back later off screen and just tighten up some of those images with the thin pen, some of the edges, just fix some of the just little bumpy edges. And I do hit it with the heat pen right now, and I write the words, who is my neighbor, because that was the sermon title, and that was the whole point of the sermon, and that's what I really need to think about. That's also what the rich young ruler asked, who is my neighbor? So I take this question mark and I stamp that, and I'm going to outline it, and I'm going to end up writing the scripture in there. And funny thing, I realized that later on that I don't even do this on the correct page. I had flipped the page, but you know what? It's all good. God knows what's in my heart. So now I'm embellishing with some of the washi tape. These are just some tapes. The ones that I'm using are from old kits. This was from the I Am Strong kit, the Devotional kit from Illustrated Faith, and the Craving Connection kit. The colors match, and I'm using some black and white tabbies. I write in the word neighbor, And I didn't like the way that worked, so I cut that off and do it again. Neighbor, question mark, who is my neighbor? And so I'm just putting those at the top, giving me a nice visual at the top of the page. And then on the side it says, I needed this, because I need to be reminded of this all the time. I use washi tape to anchor it down, and I just kind of layer the washi a little bit along the edges. I use this precious clip. It's an arrow and a heart, and it reminds me to just reach out. I am going to take this stamp, the heart, and stamp it on some of the cardstock, the card that is left over from Craving the connection kit, the Devotional. So I cut that out, and I'm going to have to heat it with the heat gun. This is a glossy cardstock, so it might smear if I don't heat it. Notice how I use the scissors tips to keep it from running away, and that also keeps my fingers from getting burnt. I'm filling in a couple of tips that did smear a little bit. After I glue this on, I realized that I wanted to give it an edge of color. So you'll see that I pull it back off gently, and I just take the blue ink pad and brush it along the side. That just gives it a pop, an edge that makes the color pop against the background. So there we have it. I do want to stamp sermon by and then the date, so I have to find the date. I always like to put my dates on there, and especially if it's based upon a sermon. So I make sure to stamp that on there, sermon by, and that clip completely covers up the word sermon, so I just cut it off, cut that puppy off, and stick it back down there. Put the person's name, the pastor's name, and there we have it. Who is my neighbor? Thanks for watching so much. Leave a comment or a question in the comment section. I'd love it if you could subscribe or like it, and come back and see me next time.